Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to Earwax. It's Colin, and today we're going over my top 5 albums of 1984. So this was actually an easier and harder year than I was expecting it to be. Easier because I was going through the list, and there's honestly not that many albums from this year that I've listened to front to back more than a handful of times. And while that might make it easier to narrow it down, it did also have to force me to think about, all right, am I just choosing these albums because they're the only ones I've listened to? Or are these actually albums that I listen to regularly and have generally enjoyed over the years? And I did find myself having to go back and revisit a couple of them and kind of be reminded on how good they actually were. But yeah, I think a lot of these albums, there's maybe 3 or 4 songs on each album that I do listen to pretty regularly on playlists or whatever, but not as many that I listen to front to back on a regular basis. That being said, I was able to narrow it down to 5 plus 3 honorable mentions. And all of these, again, are studio albums, so no live albums, no compilations, no EPs. Also, these are all albums that I've listened to front to back more than 3 or 4 times at some point throughout my life. So that's kind of where I ended up with these. And while there's other albums from this year, whether they be live albums or compilations that I may have listened to more, I'm not going to include them in this list just because, again, that's kind of always been my rule with these videos, is I want to focus on actual studio albums. So with that being said, let's get into the honorable mentions. Real quick though, guys, before we do that, if you could please like, subscribe, ring that bell, leave a comment down below if you enjoyed this video. All that stuff helps on my channel a bunch. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the first honorable mention. And that is Mirror Moves by the Psychedelic Furs. So this is an album that I haven't actually listened to fully in a handful of years now. I had to go back. I was really into the Psychedelic Furs in college, and I have listened to them pretty regularly over the years, but mostly on playlists or radio station stuff like that. This is not an album I have on vinyl, but after going back and listening to it again for this list, I realized how good it actually was and definitely need to pick it up at some point. Second album for my honorable mentions is going to be U2's Unforgettable Fire. Now, this is an album in the early part of U2's discography that I don't find myself going back to all that often. It does have some amazing songs on it, and I like that it's got more of kind of a mellow feel than some of the other stuff they were putting out. But if I do choose to listen to earlier U2, I'm almost always going for Boy or War. I think those 2 albums are just absolutely incredible. Or the Joshua Tree, which is probably my favorite, or maybe my second favorite U2 album. So while Unforgettable Fire is still an amazing album, and there's some great songs on it, it's not one that I generally immediately go to, but every time I do listen to it, I am reminded how good those early years of U2 really were. And last but certainly not least of the honorable mentions is going to be Iron Maiden's Power Slave. Now, this is, again, it's not my favorite Iron Maiden album, but it's great. It's got Aces High. It's got a bunch of other really great tracks. It's definitely one of the most cohesive albums of theirs. And, one that I have listened to front to back fairly regularly. There was, I don't know, maybe a solid decade where I wasn't listening to a ton of 80s metal, and I've gotten back into it recently. And this is one I definitely find throwing on more often than not. So that's going to be it for the honorable mentions. Let's talk about number 5. And that album is Junk Culture by Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, or OMD for short. Now, in my opinion, they are one of the most underrated 80s synth pop bands to ever exist. I mean, I know there's a lot of bands that get a ton of credit, like Depeche Mode, the Human League, even New Order gets very synth poppy. And, I think that these guys kind of get pushed to the side a little bit, and that's a crime because they are absolutely incredible. Another band that I saw at Darker Waves a couple years ago, and they were probably one of the highlights of the entire festival. Still sound amazing today. This album doesn't necessarily have any of their hits. I mean, Tesla Girls is kind of it's a club hit, dance hit. But the whole album front to back is really, really good. Locomotion and Talking Loud and Clear, I think, are the other two bigger singles from this album. But if you're a fan of synth pop at all, or like 80s sort of electronic music, dance music, and you haven't listened to this album, put it on your list, because I will die on the hill that OMD is super underrated. And if you're not listening to them and you're into this type of music, you're doing yourself a disservice for sure. Number 4 is going to be Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen. So let me caveat this by saying I didn't get into this album really until maybe about 10 years ago. My dad, huge Bruce Springsteen fan, definitely kind of showed me a lot of him as I was growing up, but I could never truly get into his sound. I don't know what it was about like the, American suburban like stadium rock that he kind of like defined that I just wasn't vibing a ton with in my earlier days. But that being said, when I did finally give this album a listen, I have to just be objective and admit it is very good and clearly incredibly influential. It's coming back in a big way right now, and it's all thanks to Bruce Springsteen, really. Now, the main reason I'm including this on my list is because it does include my 2 favorite Bruce Springsteen songs of all time, I'm on Fire and Dancing in the Dark. Now, Born in the USA is a great song as well, even though the majority of people that listen to it don't actually understand the lyrics, but that's okay. But again, it's a good album. It's well deserving. I'm sure if I was being objective, like I might have placed this higher than number 4. But that being said, like the fact that it's on my list is surprising even to me, because I'm not like the biggest Bruce Springsteen fan. But this album, if I was going to choose a Bruce Springsteen album to listen to, it's going to be this one, hands down, every single time. Number 3 is going to be Ocean Rain by Echo and the Bunnymen. This is an album that's similar to the Psychedelic Furs album. I hadn't listened to front to back in a while. And then again, it was like I had The Killing Moon on a bunch of playlists. I had Silver on a few playlists, Seven Seas on a few playlists, but it had been a while since I sat down and listened to it front to back. And I gave it a few more listens while I was considering putting it on this list. And it's well deserving. I mean, this is an incredible album. Probably, honestly, one of the best post-punk albums of all time. And it's honestly criminal that I haven't been listening to this more regularly on a heavier rotation than I have been, because it is very, very good. If you like post-punk at all, this album should very well be on your all-time greats list, hands down. Next is going to be Metallica's Ride the Lightning. Now, I am not one of those bands that thinks their only good albums are this and Kill 'Em All. However, I am one of those Metallica fans that thinks this and Kill 'Em All are their best albums, for sure. And this album in particular, while I do prefer Kill 'Em All, because I love just the raw energy and power of it, I do think Ride the Lightning overall is a better album objectively. You've got probably one of the best songs they've ever written in Fade to Black, which is probably a top 2 or 3 Metallica song for me. Fight Fire with Fire, the opening track, is just heavy, raw, in your face. And then, of course, it's got For Whom the Bell Tolls, which is, again, definitely one of the best songs they've ever written. But this whole track list front to back, Creeping Death is amazing as well. And it's just, there's something really special about these 2 albums, because while there was clearly other metal bands and other thrash bands and other heavy metal bands that were doing stuff this time, no one was doing it quite like them. And I mean, it's pretty evident what ended up happening because of that, especially on their 3rd album, Master of Puppets, that became the most commercially successful metal band of all time. And I think it's really due to this album. I mean, you still got a lot of the raw energy that you found on Kill 'Em All, while seeing snippets of the more melodic and thoughtful songwriting that they would incorporate into Master of Puppets. And to this day, it's a killer album. And number 1 for me is going to be the self-titled debut album from The Smiths. Now, I know what you're going to say. Smiths shouldn't be on this list because Morrissey's a piece of shit. And he is. I'm not going to lie. But it's undeniable that the magic that he and Johnny Marr created in the 80s with their songwriting capabilities is just outstanding. Not to dismiss the other 2 members of the band. Incredibly talented. Mike Joyce and Andy Rourke. But I mean, Marr and Morrissey were like the songwriting core of the Smiths, and all of the albums that they've done are absolutely incredible. And it all started with this one. I mean, you've got the big single off this and Hand in Glove, but this whole album front to back, I mean, what difference does it make? Still Ill, Miserable Lie. Like, it's an incredible album. It really is. I'm not going to say like the birth of indie rock because it's not. I mean, we all know that. I mean, the Velvet Underground is arguably the birth of indie rock. Some stuff that the Stooges and Iggy Pop were doing could definitely be, filtered in that direction as well. There was a lot of bands that influenced that, but like no one quite had the sound that the Smiths came out with. And whether you classify them as like post-punk, indie rock, I mean, early indications of like what would eventually become like emo and alt rock. I mean, they're easily like the most iconic and defining band in that genre, maybe up until Pixies came around. Like, I don't know. But this album in particular, like, it's not, again, not my favorite Smiths album, but it is just that good. And this is one that I have played on repeat multiple times since I first started listening to it, also in college. I didn't really get into a lot of this good stuff until college. And yeah, I mean, I don't think I need to speak any more on the genius of the Smiths. I mean, I think most people that really appreciate music can look back on those few albums that they created together and recognize that they are some of the best music that's ever been written. It is unfortunate that, Morrissey kind of turned into who he is now. But that being said, Johnny Marr has been doing some amazing stuff in the past few years. Definitely go check out some of his other projects and some of his solo music. That man is a legend, and I absolutely love him to death. And everything that I've like read and seen in him interviews, he seems pretty chill too. So at least one half of that songwriting duo is a pretty good guy, and that alone is enough to cement this album as the best album of 1984. All right, guys, so that's going to be it for me. Let me know down in the comments what your top 5 albums of 1984 were. Again, like, subscribe, ring that bell. All of that helps me out a ton. And as always, I'll talk to you later. Peace.